All right, this is lesson number 5. We're going to be working with different shading techniques. In our previous lesson, we talked about pressure control, shading smoothly, and light behavior. When we talked about that, we talked about value scales, how to not use your wrist and to use your whole arm when we drew, and we talked about light behavior, where the light source comes in, or where the core shadow and the cast shadow hits, and how we're using our value scale to add in different values to give that form an actual illusion of 3D. Awesome. So today we're going to be working with different shading techniques. We're going to be working with blending, hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, scubbling, and scribbling. For this lesson, I have included a worksheet for you guys. It's very similar to the value scale I had you guys do last time, but in this one, we're actually going to be doing different types of shading techniques from light to darkest. Awesome. But a previous of last lesson, lesson 4, it's the same thing as dark to light, and we're going to be using these different techniques to be able to apply to draw another apple. Awesome. So the first one we're going to be looking at is I want you guys to keep this first box white and get darker as you go. So shading is simply just like shading and blending simply like we did before. So all about pressure control, right? And notice the way I'm gripping my pencil. I'm not really gripping it like you would grip it in a classroom, right? Now with blending, you guys can use something called a stump, or you can simply use a Q-tip, or you can simply just use your finger. And by doing that, you're really trying to blend those colors together, right? So that's blending. You're going from lightest to darkest. Now hatching is a process of using vertical lines on top of each other to create darker values. So if I'm going to be very light, you're going to keep it light. We're going to do very... So you're going to start to move your hatching lines a lot closer together to get a lot better of a value scale. A lot darker, right? Closer you go, the darker it appears to look, right? And I simply will just go right back over my hatch marks the same direction to get it get a lot darker. All right, so then we're gonna go to cross-hatching. If you can kind of guess, cross-hatching is when you do crisscross with your hatching, so you're going the other way. So you're doing vertical and horizontal lines. So first we start off with some that are pretty far apart. We're gonna get closer together. You notice the closer I get, the darker it becomes. So you guys can try this. The more and more I go, but now let's say if I want to change my paper around a little bit and change the angle, and I'm still gonna do cross-hatching, but I'm just gonna add a lot more vertical and horizontal lines in there. By doing so, it gets the value darker. All right, the next one is called stippling. And this one works better with a pen or some type of marker. So just to show you guys the effect that we'll use with the marker, I'm just gonna use this marker. And by stippling, it's called pointillism, and it's about applying dots. And the closer the dots get, the darker it becomes. The more farther apart, the more lighter it becomes. So if I were to just do, so you're applying more and more dots as you go. So you can kind of see how my hand's almost shaking, right? So I'm really trying to get all those dots in there. The more and more you do, the more and more value scale you're going to get. Now these processes, you're going to notice that the more and more you go back over, it's going to get darker. So if I wanted to come back up here to blending and I just blend a little bit more, it's going to get darker. If I go back to hatching and I make my hatching, it's all about the process of revisiting and going back over your processes, right? And the last one is called scribbling or scrumbling. And that's the process of little small circles together. So the first one would be very small circles. And the more and more you go, the more busier it becomes. Right? So it's just a process of applying layers and layers of the shading techniques on top of each other. So one more time, it's blending, hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and scribbling. Awesome, so now that we know our different techniques, we're gonna go back and we're gonna visit our last lesson. We're gonna try to use one of these techniques to draw an apple. So we're thinking about our light source, our light behavior, and how light reflects off the table. So if you remember last time, I'm gonna start off by drawing a small circle that's going to represent an apple. Right? So I'm gonna give that apple a position on a table. So I'm gonna draw a foreground and background. I'm also gonna determine where the light source is coming. So I think I want my light source to be right here. Come this way. Now, if you remember the light source and how it reflects, we're going to see how it hits the table. So you kind of want to draw from that light source or from that flashlight a diagonal line that shows you where the light source is going. This will help you determine where your cast shadow is. A cast shadow is when light reflects and hits the surface, or your cast shadow. Right? Now we're thinking about how light side and shadow side. So we divide that apple in half. We have this be our light side and this be our shadow side. So we know by simply looking at our values scales and by looking at our previous value scale, we know that this is going to go from dark to lightest, right? So now we're going to use our techniques that we just practice, and we're going to apply it to shading of this apple from light and shadow side, right? So we're also going to think about how this core shadow right here is in place, has the light reflects from the table and up. So I'm going to use a process of cross hatching. Okay, so first I'm just going to get some hatching in there as I change the angle of my wrist and the table. And we're also thinking about how hard I'm pushing down with my pencil. You can also create your value scales just by pressure control, right? So I'm getting my core in there. So now I gotta think about how this will go from darkest to lightest. So start to think about how maybe I don't want to do cross hatching. I'm just going to have it light hatching and add it as we go. And same with down here, right? We know that the core shadow is going to be the darkest. So we just got to... Now don't be afraid to use all your techniques together. Now I'm going to go back, I'm going to add in scribbling right here. Have it lighten up as it gets lighter out here. Right. And we can add in a little bit more, maybe blending down here. Use your finger to really get in there. Alright, so we're just using all these different shading techniques to really darken the dark spots and really lighten up the light spots. And you'll soon see that your shape will form into an illusion of 2D to 3D, right? Alright, and that completes today's lesson.